All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Hello there. I see folks are starting to tune in. This is Joseph giving you this broadcast live from Israel. This is Kabbalah Explained Simply on what will be the future of humanity. So let me know where you're watching from right there in the chat. See if I'm looking this way. It means I'm looking into the chat. All right. I see folks are tuning in from LA and from Hungary and South Africa and Nigeria and Botswana and Spain. Nigeria I saw earlier as well. That's beautiful. All right. Okay, so we will get going in just a second here. Quebec is in the house, Russia, New Jersey, North Carolina. All right. All right, everybody. Okay. So, what will be the future of humanity? This is Kabbalah Explained Simply. So, we're going to talk about Kabbalah's perspective on what will be the future of humanity. Now, I have to say, at the very beginning of this, Kabbalah does not have any crystal ball, nor does it engage in fortune telling or any kind of mysticism or magic that will tell you what the future is going to be. However, Kabbalah and Kabbalists do research the hidden laws of nature, the kind of laws that govern everything that happens in our material world. So, when it comes to Kabbalah's perspective on the future of humanity, here is how I would frame the question. Here is what we should be asking. We should be asking, is there a prism? Is there some framework that comes from the laws of nature that can help us see what is going on with human development? When we look at the world today, and we're in a crazy world that is, one may say, is becoming crazier every day, right? We're kind of gradually, depending where you are in the world, getting out of a global pandemic. There's rising political tensions all the time. The social divide is culminating. On the other hand, there's so much technological progress that is happening that is reshaping our world in so many ways. Virtual reality, augmented reality, big data, AI, automation, right? What will happen with the future of the workplace? Our planet is in deep ecological catastrophe. That's another thing. And when you think about not just where we are today, but how did we get here? What has brought us here, right? You think about, like, let's think in a nutshell about some big milestones of human development, right? So definitely the agricultural revolution is there, and then the industrial revolution, the information revolution, this whole process of globalization that we are in the middle of. And so the question is really, is there some prism that we can grab hold of, that we can use to look at human development that is based on the laws of nature that can really help us see where we are headed? So, hopefully today I'm going to share with you that exact prism based on the wisdom of Kabbalah that will help you understand not just what is happening right now in the world, but also what happened that led to where we are now and what will happen as well. So, I'm Joseph. This is Kabbalah Explained Simply, coming up now. All right. So, once again, I am Joseph. I'm a senior instructor at CubU, which is the online learning center dedicated to sharing the authentic wisdom of Kabbalah and the science of connection that originates from it. I will be definitely looking at the chat, which means I'm looking this way, and I'll be looking for your questions. Let me know where you're watching from. If you haven't done that already, go ahead and do that. Those who are tuning in right now, please let us know where you're watching from. Ruth, also behind the scenes, is helping me kind of collect questions from the chat. So definitely send in questions as we go. All right. So look, I know we wanted to talk about the future of humanity here, right? Whoops. There we go. But the future of humanity is kind of a big thing. So I thought, why not start with something simpler? All right. This is a light bulb. That's a simpler way to start if we want to talk about the future of humanity. No, I want to show you an example, and I want you to keep it in mind for later, and you'll see how, hopefully, how it all connects. So what are we looking at here? This is a light bulb, the classic kind, right, where there's a metal filament that lights up and emits light. But what is happening in that process that makes this happen? So we have the battery in this case as a power source. It doesn't matter what power source it is typically built from plus and minus, right? So if we take the battery, for example, so we have negatively charged particles on one side and positively charged particles on the other side. And so because there's a separation between them in the battery, and because there is a law of nature that determines that the minus and the plus aspire towards equilibrium, the negatively charged particles, also known as electrons, if you can see my mouse, yeah, I think you can see my mouse cursor, the electrons flow from the minus to the plus, and that is basically what we call an electrical current, right? So this aspiration towards equilibrium between the negatively and positively charged particles creates this flow. Now, if you put a device like this light bulb in the middle of that flow on the circuit, you can use the energy that is there, right? So what do we have in a light bulb? Essentially, there is a metal filament, right, that has what you call a high melting point, and that filament is therefore capable of withstanding the tension that exists there between the minus and the plus and converting that electric energy to light, right? So that was the big deal that Thomas Edison or Joseph Swan, depending on which side of history you're on, that is what they came up with, that we use to this day. Of course, technology improves, but the basic concept is that there is a metal filament that can withstand that tension between the plus and the minus and utilize that tension in order to emit light. All right, so we want to understand how that has to do with the future of humanity, right? So remember this example, and let's go into a quote. This is from Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag, also known as Bar Sulam. Let me remove my camera here so you can see the quote in full, and let's read it. This is coming from one of Bar Sulam's articles, The Nation. Again, if you don't know, Bar Sulam is the preeminent Kabbalist of the previous century. He is the one who wrote the commentary on the book of Zohar, which is really the seminal book of the wisdom of Kabbalah. So here's what Bar Sulam writes for us. There is none that does not obey the iron law of gradual evolution resulting from the collision of these two forces with one another. One, a positive force, meaning constructive, and two, a negative force, meaning negative and destructive. They create and complement the entire reality in general and particular through their harsh and perpetual war with one another until they reach their ultimate perfection. All right, so what have we been told here about the structure of reality, about the nature of evolution? Kabbalah views everything that is happening as a result of two opposite forces. We can call them positive and negative, as Bar Sulam just showed us, or plus and minus. And so these two opposite forces run through all of reality, from the micro to the macro, from quantum fluctuations to social and economic processes in human society. Everything and anything is a result of the interplay between these two forces, and they may appear as plus and minus, protons and electrons, attraction and rejection, heat and cold, light and darkness, male and female, of course, contraction and expansion, diffusion, osmosis, desire, fulfillment, ebb, flow, inhale, exhale. It's everywhere. They can take the shape of physical shape or physical processes or chemical reactions or biological processes or even psychological discernments. We're talking about two opposite forces that make up each and every layer of nature: still, vegetative, animate, and of course, human. And everything that we see in one way or another is the result of the collision, the tension, the polarity between these two forces. So let's continue with Bar Salam. He gives us an example which I really like. He talks about how planet Earth was created as a result of these two opposite forces. But before we go to that example, just to make it Kabbalistically clear, we are talking about everything in our world, in our material world, being the result of these two forces which are fundamentally non-material. We're talking about all of the manifestations of these two forces, as the many examples that I just gave. They are results of two primordial non-material qualities that come before there is even a material world. And these two qualities, in the wisdom of Kabbalah, we call them the light and the kli, or the quality of bestowal and the quality of reception. So these two forces of bestowal and reception, giving and receiving, the interplay between them creates everything in our world, our whole material reality, and the evolution from one level of life to the next. As Bar Salam told us earlier, until they reach their ultimate perfection. Right? So we call them in Kabbalah light and kli, and essentially these are the qualities of bestowal and reception. All right, so now let's continue to Bar Salam's example. So let me remove myself again for the quotes. All right, let's take planet Earth as an example. First, it was but a ball of fog-like gas. Through the gravity inside it, over time, it concentrated the atoms in it into a closer circle. As a result, the ball of gas became a liquid ball of fire. Over eons of terrible wars between the two forces within Earth, the positive and the negative, the chilling force in it was finally triumphant over the force of liquid fire. It cooled a thin crust around the Earth and hardened there. So Balasalam starts telling us the story of how Earth was created through this prism of the two opposite forces. But it doesn't stop there, because the process continues until Earth is actually a viable planet for biological life. So he continues. However, the planet had not yet grown still from the war between the forces, and after some time the liquid fire erupted in great tumult from the bowels of the earth, rising and shattering the cold, hard crust to pieces. Thus the eons interchanged, and each time the cooling force prevailed, the crust it made grew thicker, and finally the positive forces overpowered the negative ones and came into complete harmony. The liquids took their place in the bowels of the earth, and the cold crust became thick enough around them to enable the creation of organic life on top of it, as it is today. All right. Okay. So what do we have here? We have a Kabbalist describing the planet Earth, the formation of planet Earth, that is, from this perspective or through this Kabbalistic prism of the two opposite forces that are gradually creating the conditions for the next level of life to emerge. So let's try to really understand what's going on here. All right. Now you should see my drawing board. So what do we have here? We have a positive force and we have a negative force. Now, what Balasalam explains to us is that the distance, the gap, the difference between them is gradually growing. I'm going to use a triangle to symbolize that, to signify this. Triangle because it's triangle means delta. I believe it's the fourth letter in Greek, and it's typically used in mathematics to denote change or difference. So the absolute difference between the plus and the minus is growing. So that is essentially what is happening in all of evolution. We see this gap or this delta growing and growing and growing, right? Let me just write this here. Let's call it delta. Let me use this font. All right. So this is what Balasalam explains to us. The delta between the two forces grows, and that necessitates each time it grows, it necessitates a new kind of relationship between the two forces. And because the gap is growing, the relationship between the two forces needs to be more advanced, and that is what creates the next level of life each time. Just like how he gave us this example with the planet Earth, that the plus and minus forces, the positive and the negative, manifested as a cooling force and a heating force, and they were in constant war until it enabled them to achieve some equilibrium, some balance, some homeostasis. But it's a complicated one. It's a complex one every time that they grow. So in the case of planet Earth, we have finally a situation where the warmth stays in the bowels of the earth, and around it there is a crust that is cool enough to use both the heat inside and the coolness on the outside to enable the creation of organic life on Earth, to enable the next level of development. All right. So where does it go from here, right? So let's keep going with Bara Sulam. Yes. So he tells us, all organisms develop by the same order. From the moment they are planted to the end of their ripening, they undergo hundreds of periods of situations due to the two forces, positive and negative, and their war against each other. And these wars yield the ripening of the fruit. Okay, let me stop here for a second. All right, let me just kind of go. I'll try to put together a diagram together with this quote so we can kind of see how it progresses. All right, so let's put this one aside and make another one. Again, we have plus and we have the minus and we have the growth of the delta between them, the difference between them. But now he tells us this is the order of development with any organism, beginning from even the still level of nature and then going up to the vegetative level of nature and also the animate level of nature. So all these organisms are the result of these two forces. They are combinations. They are advanced, increasingly advanced relationships between the two opposite forces. And so each time the delta is growing, right? So let's put here another one and another one, but whoops, there we go. This one is bigger than the previous one, and this one is even bigger than the previous one. All right, so now let's see what happens next. Back to Bara Sulam's quote. For us, however, the material force, for us meaning humans, right? For us humans, however, the material force is insufficient to bring us to completion due to the contemplative power in us, which is thousands of times more valuable than the material force in us. Thus, for humans, there's a new order. Listen up. Thus, for humans, there is a new order of gradual development, unlike any other animal. The gradual development of human thought. So what is he telling us here? Bara Sulam tells us that the process continues and creates the next level of development. But between, let me make a line here. This one should not be an arrow, just a dashed line. I like this dashed line. Okay, that makes the point. So between the animate level and then the next level of development, we don't just have the biggest delta here. It's not just a bigger delta. The human level is unique in that this kind of relationship that is being formed between the plus and the minus on the human level is of a completely different nature, of a completely different quality. And that is a relationship that demands our conscious participation, our conscious involvement in the process. And so, while with all the other organisms, with all the other levels of nature actually, still vegetative and animate, the relationship between the plus and the minus is achieved instinctively. So we have the cooling force and the heating force, and ultimately they reach homeostasis, and that enables biological life on planet Earth. And then we have the flora and fauna of Earth developing all kinds of creatures, a diversity and infinity of creatures that are essentially different manifestation of the combination between the positive force and the negative force. But all of these relationships, all of these degrees of connections between plus and minus, they're all instinctive. Nature just creates the homeostasis. What happens on the human level is that the gap between the plus and the minus is so great, and the relationship that is required between the plus and the minus in order to create balance, in order to create homeostasis, the relationship is so advanced that it requires conscious participation. And that's the big deal with human beings. And this is what makes us so very different from all the other levels of development. Now, remember this? Let me just go back to this, right? Remember this one? The light bulb? So, nature is developing us to be capable of consciously using the tension that exists naturally between the plus and minus, and using the plus and minus, transcending both of them, merging them consciously to make something similar to the flow of nature, is what spiritual development is all about. And so according to Kabbalah, all of nature, everything that happened on the still vegetative and animate levels from the Big Bang 14 billion years ago until today, including everything that is happening in human society today, is pushing us to a point where we can achieve spiritual development, which is, in other words, using the tension between the minus and the plus, becoming the device that is capable of using that tension and, similarly, allegorically speaking, like the light bulb, emit light. All right. At this point, I think it might be a good idea to stop for some questions before we go further. We do need to definitely understand better how does that manifest in human development, right? How do these two forces actually come into being in everything that we see around us in the world? We'll talk about that, but first, let's go to some questions, I would say. And you know what? I see we still have a bit of time, so I got a surprise for you all. I have a video clip for you, produced by yours truly, and it's part of a series that I'm working on together with some friends, with other KabU instructors. A video series for KabU, our online learning center. So it's in the works. No one has seen it yet, and I mean no one, so this is definitely kind of a premiere or a debut or whatever you want to call it. Still in the works, but if you're here live, you've earned it. So while you're watching, I'll try to look at some of the questions you guys sent, and then I'll be here back in just a few minutes. Of course, it's the video clip has everything to do with what we just discussed, so enjoy. When you look at the beauty of nature, when you observe this majestic harmony that permeates every atom in existence, when you really take it in, you can almost see the greater governing force that animates all of nature. Life into infinite particles, creating the most diverse beauty, the most sublime intelligence that is all of life. And it's essentially a program designed to give life, to create, sustain, and guide the evolution of life. So when we see things in nature that seem cruel or violent, it's all part of the program. It's part of the harmonious symphony of life. Because nature is this incredible interplay between opposite forces. It's the inconceivable union of heat and cold, light and darkness, ebb and flow, male and female, all dancing together to create life. Of nature follow this program of interdependence. It's embedded in their DNA, coded into their instincts. Every rock, every plant, every animal embodies the program. So what about us humans? Are we not part of nature's all-pervasive program of life? Are we some kind of cosmic anomaly? Why do we humans evolve to feel independent and separate from each other and the rest of nature? Is it possible that our sense of separation is by design? Is it possible that Mother Nature as if pushed us humans out of her womb to give us a sense of independence so we can choose to participate in nature's program? Because then we would gain a conscious experience of the wholeness and perfection and bliss that surround us. Then all our crimes, our conflicts, division, wars, they're just a phase of our evolution. Until we can consciously integrate with nature's program, until we can hear the symphony of life around us and join the dance. So if Mother Nature knows what she's doing, then our conscious connection to each other and to all of nature is our inevitable future. Okay, we are back. Thank you, everybody, for the warm words. I really hope you enjoyed it. It it was very, very exciting to make this one, and I'm still working with a few great people on this video series, and it will be released on KabU as soon as possible. So let's go on to some questions. All right, so we had Debbie Brady, who asked, do you think that eventually animals will rise to consciousness? Okay. You know what? Let's look at this diagram as we talk about this. So what is going on here? We have a developing delta, a developing gap, difference between the two forces. Consciousness of the rest of nature exists as well. Consciousness or sentience is essentially anything that is felt between the plus and the minus. You know, there's a lot of discussion and arguments among scientists on what is consciousness and how to define consciousness. In Kabbalah, it can be clearly defined based on the dynamic of these two forces. Consciousness is what happens between those two forces. That is essentially why this dynamic was created, to create consciousness. But there are levels of consciousness, and yes, the human level is the true, the highest level of consciousness from all the four levels of nature, and it is the only one that Kabbalistically we can actually consider as conscious, but not even the kind of level of humanity that we are in right now. We're talking about rising to a level of consciousness where we, just like I was trying to communicate in the video, where we get the mind of nature, where the tension between the plus and the minus and the completion between them that is formed within our emotion, within our mind, in our consciousness, raises us to a level that Kabbalists refer to as adhesion with the governing force of nature. This adhesion or bonding or connection means that we gain nature's mind. I'll stop here, but you understand from this the answer about the levels of consciousness. So animals will not get to that level, but can you consider their experience conscious to an extent? Yes. All right. Daniel Gertzikov was asking, is the creator a disembodied intellect or a system of the duality laws, I guess the laws of the two forces, or both? Okay. The creator is what we achieve, what we attain, what we discover as the ultimate connection between the plus and the minus that constitutes their source. It is the source of both the plus and the minus. It is the source from which the duality has concatenated, has descended and unfolded. This whole process of polarity and duality between plus and minus is something we go through as created beings because we have no other way to attain wholeness, perfection, unbounded oneness, which is the quality of the creator. We have no way to achieve that, to understand it, to conceive of that, if we don't go through that process of developing between the plus and the minus to the point that we can put them together, or you can say they coalesce within us until we can understand what wholeness, perfection, and oneness is. And that is the degree of the creator. All right, another question. what do you mean, Daniel Verganet asking, what do you mean with reaching their ultimate perfection? Okay, so it's basically the same thing that I just explained right now. Ultimate perfection, yes. You're referring to Bala Sulam's quote. I'll go back to it. Worthwhile to put it here again, to show it again here. So this is what you're referring to, right? The second paragraph, the two forces create and complement the entire reality in general and particular through their harsh and perpetual war with one another until they reach their ultimate perfection. So reaching their ultimate perfection, as I just explained, means that they become one again. But they can only become one when there is a sentient conscious being that experiences the tension between them as an act of unity. All right, let's go into some more questions. Paul de Bruin, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You're asking, plus and minus need a neutral third force, the equilibrium. Can we assume that the third force is consciousness or will? Absolutely. We've just been you're ahead of time. You wrote that question ahead of time. Good thinking, though. Yes, exactly. There's another one here from Murphy. Murphy Anita is asking, how are you sure that all natural processes require two opposing forces? Okay. The reason is this. All of our material evolution is everything from the Big Bang onwards. That is all a result of a deeper causal level of reality. What we see here, everything we see in nature here on the material world, still vegetative, animate, and human level, these are results of a deeper program that is non-material. And so the polarity between the plus and the minus and all their degrees where they are intertwined together, there's 125 degrees like that from until they reach complete oneness. All of those degrees, they create and determine everything in the material world. And because this deeper program, this non-material spiritual program, is fundamental, is primordial, it determines what happens in our world. That's why everything that exists here in nature, is also divided to these two forces run by the dynamic or the interplay between the two forces. Okay, let's do some, I think we can do some more questions. One second, where was I? Yeah, okay. To be conscious is asking, to be conscious, yes. That's a good it's a good nickname for what we're talking about. All right. So you're asking, maybe the Big Bang was like two particles with opposite charges, I guess, colliding, male and female, creating this world. No, okay. I'll explain. No, the two, as I was just saying with regards to the previous question, the two forces, I don't know if I should go into a full-on drawing for this. Might take too long. I'll try without. So the Big Bang is already after these two forces exist in spirituality. The Big Bang is actually the result of what we call the spark of light. Remember this diagram where we talked about the here. I'll show it 1 second. This one, right? So there we go. Now you can see what I'm talking about. So it's the Big Bang is the result of the very final degree, spiritual degree of development from above downwards, from the initial state of creation of the created being to the very final spiritual degree when the light permeates the Kli, when the spark of bestowal, in other words, you can also call it like that, permeates the quality of reception, the desire to receive in its lowest degree, that is what sparks the development of the material world, which scientists find evidence to in the form of the Big Bang. That's a whole lesson in itself. How the Big Bang explained by Kabbalah. Maybe we'll, if you're up for it, maybe we'll do a session just about that. Okay, but for now, I think we should, looking at our time here, we should probably move on to some more, maybe last question, and then we'll move on to some more content. Okay, my first adventure is asking, is in the population decline that will occur as the result of global warming, does Kabbalah say this concentrates spirituality or dissipate? Hey, my first adventure, I'm not sure what you mean by this will concentrate or dissipate spirituality. Maybe you meant to, not sure exactly what you meant here, but it's good enough. I can say this, that all of the global events that we are now experiencing, including changes in global population or global warming, as we call it, climate destabilization, you may call it like that maybe, it's all one system. It's the planet and us. We are one interconnected being. Beyond matter, we are a spiritual entity. In fact, the collective soul of humanity, and this is a term that needs to be expressed. The problem with terms like soul, they sound mystical. They have a very technical definition in the wisdom of Kabbalah. But this non-material entity that is humanity, it's intertwined with all the other levels of nature. And so when we move towards balancing the positive and negative forces consciously, which is what nature wants us to do, to be consciously involved, to take a conscious part in our own development towards balance and equilibrium, then all the other levels of nature will be affected by it, because we are the most conscious level, and that creates a ripple effect through the animate, vegetative, and still level of development. So if you want to really solve the eco genocide that is happening on this planet right now, I'm not saying don't try to. If you want to recycle or things like that, you can go ahead and try. But at the end of the day, that's not what's going to work, and because that's not why these problems are happening. These problems are happening because we need to achieve balance with nature on the inner causal level of the program. And only then the external layers will fall into place as well, will come into balance as well. So again, I don't know if that's exactly related to what you were asking. I didn't understand the end of the question, but I hope this helped. So let's go from here to let's go from here to another bit here that I wanted to share with you. Yeah, we need to talk about this. Humanity, human development. How do these two forces that we're talking about, the plus and the minus, how do they actually manifest in human development? Right? This delta that we are talking about. Oh, cool. I have this red thingy here. Now it's working. So this delta, right? These two arrows that represent the growing gap between the plus and the minus. How does that take place today, right now, in front of our eyes? What does that mean with regards to human development? Where do we see these two plus and minus forces, this delta? Where do we see it in human history and in human present and in human future, right? That's what we're here for. So here is what happens. in the case of human development, the plus and minus, let me start from the arrows right now. Let me just make it more like this. There we go. Okay, that's good enough. So the plus and minus in human development, they take the form of two conflicting trends that we can see throughout all of our human history. One, you can call it the negative force, is that of the growing human ego. Let me just change the font again. Okay. And the other one is that of interdependence. And if you want to be really more specific about it, then you can even say global interdependence. What do I mean? The growth of the ego is one side of the equation. The growth of interdependence is another side of the equation, and they both grow at the same time. Therefore, the gap between them is growing, and it necessitates us to reach another level of existence. What do I mean? The growth of the human ego. Okay, so think about it like this. Humans have been around on this planet for about 200,000 years, right? Something like that. Now, at first, we lived in tribes. We were closer in our way of living to animals. We lived in packs, in tribes, in clans of some sort. We were very much dependent on our survival instinct, and that survival instinct brought us together to try to save ourselves in the face of danger. And we were, at that point, we felt each other, we felt more connected to each other instinctively. Pretty much think pack of wolves, think a herd of elephants. I'm not saying that humans were exactly that, but that's just an example to think about the kind of instinctive relationship that is brought about by this very, very primitive survival instinct. What happens over time is that we humans gradually evolve to become more independent and separate from each other and from the rest of nature. You know, again, you can still find indigenous people today who are much more sensitive to nature. They can tell you as if what's going to happen with regards to the weather and the climate in their area without any special tools. They feel the animals a lot more, the plants a lot more. Why is that? Because when the growth of egoism happens in human society, we become more and more detached from nature. The fact that we don't feel as part of nature today is because of that growing ego, or in other words, the growing sense of conscious separation. That makes us feel independent. That makes us develop a culture that is centered around this independence. It makes us glorify the individual and individual pursuits. Look at how modern culture, especially in the West, as time progresses, it becomes more and more about individual freedom, individual pursuits. That changes how we create the social order and the different regimes that we go through. More and more rights are given to the individual, more emphasis is given to individual freedom, and so on and so forth. That is all the result of the growth of the human ego. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad. It's a natural dynamic. It's a force of nature. But at the same time, on the other hand, humans are evolving to become globally interdependent. That is something that is culminating right now in our time, in front of us, on the news, in the world, every day. We started from scattering around the globe, right? If you go back even a couple thousand years ago, like say about 4,000 years ago, ancient Mesopotamia, right? Or Babylon, the cradle of human civilization, where there was what? Maybe a couple million people in all of humanity back then. That's all. What happened is we scattered across the globe, started occupying all the places on the planet and started growing. And then at some point we started tying ourselves to each other around the globe through all of these seemingly external systems of trade and commerce and the economic system, right? And politics and international relations, and of course the information age, the internet, which raises us to a level of connection above time and space. Point in case, I'm broadcasting to you from Israel right now, and it's almost 9 p.m., which means we have to conclude in a few minutes, but you're in probably the other side of the world or some other part of the world in a different geography, on a different continent, in a different time zone. And yet we can share the same consciousness. And gradually humanity is becoming a more and more globalized society. The narratives are becoming global as well. Not to mention that just a couple months ago, the world was deep in a global pandemic that made us feel that interdependence between us even more. So I'll stop here. I think you understand the concept. Where is this going? Back to my drawing here. All right. So these two trends are conflicting trends. They're opposite. They're like that plus and the minus. They are a manifestation of the plus and the minus. But here's the thing. Nature is developing the delta here, like we've seen before, right? Developing the gap between the plus and the minus. And it is growing and growing. And right now we're talking just about the evolution of human society, right? This is all with regards to humanity, or the human level of development. Until what point? What is the goal here? So remember the light bulb example? We need to reach a point where we bring together the growth of the human ego with our inevitable interdependence. Nature is pushing us to be one network across the globe, and yet we're all egoists and we're individualists, and we don't sense that connection with each other. We sense separate. We feel like we are 8 billion separated individual beings, and yet we're all interconnected, interdependent, and we're going to see this more and more as time progresses. Why is that? Because we're going to have to rise to a new level of consciousness that will enable us to work with our ego in a whole new way. This is what Kabbalists call developing an intention. And that intention is like the metal filament of the light bulb. It's like a new creation in itself. It's something we don't currently have, but we can practice it, and we can learn how to develop it, and we can expedite and accelerate the process instead of being pushed by pain and conflict from nature, on nature's part, to gradually develop that. That level here is a completely new thing that we don't yet have, but it will allow us, that new intention will allow us to use our ego for the benefit of the whole. We will be able to embrace our interdependence. And so today, back to talking about the future of humanity, our world is at a deep crossroads. We're just heading towards a huge transition. We call it the Great Transition of all of the infrastructures of humanity, all of our social systems, all of the ways in which we connect with each other, and that includes the workplace and of economics and how we treat the planet, our ecosystem, and our social order, of course, the trust between those who lead society, politicians today, right, and citizens. All of that is going into turmoil until we'll be able to rise to a new level, to develop this new intention, and then we will be able to create a new social order that will be aimed at achieving balance with the natural system, with the deeper program of nature. Look, I gotta go. This is the time to conclude exactly right now. Obviously, there is a lot more that can be said about this. I find this whole topic and the words of the Kabbalists about this fascinating. I will be continuing to a Q&A session with the KabU students in a minute from now. So if you're a KabU student, jump into the Zoom link that you've received. You got a link in your email to the live page, I think. Anyway, go to the Zoom right now. I'll be there in a minute. And for everyone who has been here with us, thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. I'm Joseph, and this was Kabbalah Explained Simply. Thank you very much. All the best.